Be me anon. Work in a small workshop that makes high-end plaster and gypsum decor. Not a factory, more like a collective of artisans. We make things like ceiling medallions, custom crown molding, and sometimes restore old architectural pieces. The work is dusty, physical, and requires a steady hand. You can't fake it. Either you can do the work, or the piece cracks and you start over. The boss, Evan, is the owner and master craftsman. He's a quiet guy, probably in his 50s. Doesn't say much, but when he does, you listen. He built this place from nothing. His whole philosophy is simple. The work speaks for itself. No politics, no drama, just skill and effort. The team is small, a few other guys, all solid workers. And then there is Cora. Cora has been here for years, longer than me. She's probably one of the best finishers I've ever seen. She can handle the heavy mixing, the sanding, the delicate detail work, everything. Doesn't complain, just works. Nobody thinks of her as the woman on the team. She's just Cora, the one you go to when you can't get a seam perfectly smooth. The atmosphere is calm. We listen to an old radio, we do our jobs, we get paid. It's a good gig, honest work. A couple of months back, Evan tells us we're getting a new intern for the summer. He says she's an art student from some well-regarded program, supposed to be bright. We figure, okay, an extra pair of hands for the grunt work. Sweeping, mixing, prepping molds, the stuff everyone has to do. The day she's supposed to start, this car I've never seen before pulls into our dusty lot. It's a brand new, shiny little electric vehicle that looks completely out of place next to our beat-up work trucks. Out steps Layla. She's dressed like she's going to an art gallery opening, not a plaster workshop. Clean, fashionable clothes, nice shoes. Not a speck of dust on her. She walks in holding a fancy water bottle and looks around the workshop with this expression on her face, a mix of curiosity and something else. Maybe disappointment? Like she was expecting a trendy downtown loft studio and instead got a room full of dust and tools. Evan gives her the tour. He's patient, showing her the different stations, the mixing area with its industrial-sized tubs, the pouring tables, the drying racks, and the finishing benches where the delicate detail work happens. He shows her a heavy silicone mold for a big ceiling medallion, probably weighs a good 70 pounds. This is where the process starts, he says. Anon and the others will usually prep and pour these in the morning. Layla looks at the mold, then at me and the other guys, and she says her first words to the team. It's fascinating how our culture still defaults to assigning heavy physical tasks to men. There's a complete silence for a second. The radio is playing some old song. Evan just blinks slowly. It's heavy. Someone has to lift it. Let me show you the finishing room. He moves on, but we all kind of look at each other. A weird first comment to make. Her first real assignment is simple. So simple, we give it to every new person. Okay, Layla, Evan says. We need these molds cleaned and prepped for the afternoon pour. Just use the compressed air to get the dust out, then wipe them down with the release agent. Cora can show you exactly how. Cora gives her a simple nod, points to the air hose and the can of agent. Just like this. Make sure you get in all the little grooves. Layla watches with a blank expression. So, it's basically a cleaning task. Cora shrugs. It's getting the molds ready. If they're not perfect, the final piece will have flaws. We all go back to our work. I'm at the finishing bench, carefully sanding the edges of a cornice piece. About an hour goes by. I get up to grab some water and walk past the prep station. Layla is sitting on a stool, scrolling through her phone. The molds are still sitting there, untouched. The air hose is coiled up on the floor. I figure maybe she took a break. No big deal. Another hour passes. Evan comes out of his office. He sees the molds, then he sees Layla on her phone. His face doesn't change. He's not a yeller. He just walks over. "How's it going with the molds, Layla?" She looks up, not flustered at all. She puts her phone down and adopts this serious academic tone. "I've been observing the workflow," she says, "and I feel my skill set could be more proactively utilized in a design-oriented capacity. Assigning me to what is essentially janitorial work feels like a perpetuation of outdated gender roles in the workplace." Evan stands there, covered in a fine layer of white dust, and just stares at her. He looks at her clean clothes, then at Cora across the room, who is effortlessly wrestling a large, freshly poured mold onto a drying rack. "This isn't a gender role, Layla," he says, his voice perfectly even. "It's the job. It's the first step of the process. I cleaned these molds for 10 years before I could afford to hire anyone else. Cora cleaned them this morning." Layla just crosses her arms. "I understand that, but perhaps it's time to evolve the process, to break the cycle of assigning menial labor to women who are capable of so much more." Before Evan can even respond, Cora walks over. She doesn't say a word to Layla. She just picks up the air hose, blasts the dust out of a mold with a loud hiss, grabs the release agent, and starts prepping it with quick, efficient movements. She does 3 molds in the time it took Layla to explain why she shouldn't have to do it. The silence is deafening. Layla watches her, and her expression is unreadable. It's not embarrassment. It's more like she's watching a fascinating but primitive specimen. Evan just sighs. "Layla, if you want to learn this craft, you start at the beginning. That means cleaning the molds. If you don't want to learn, the door is right there." She must have needed the internship credit, because she didn't leave. She got up and, with a deeply put-upon sigh, slowly started cleaning the molds. She did a terrible job, of course. We had to redo 2 of them after she was done. That was the first sign. It only got weirder from there. She appointed herself the workshop's social conscience. One afternoon, we had the radio on, just a classic rock station. A song comes on, something generic from the 80s about a girl. Layla stops what she's doing, which was slowly stirring a bucket of plaster like it was a cauldron of poison, and announces, "Could we please listen to something that isn't so blatantly reinforcing of the male gaze?" One of the other guys, Dave, just says, "I like this song." Layla shakes her head. That's the insidious nature of the patriarchy. It makes you enjoy your own subjugation of women through media. Dave just put his headphones on. She seemed to develop a special project, Cora. She seemed genuinely baffled by her. She couldn't understand why Cora wasn't angry, why she wasn't demanding special treatment. One day at lunch, I was sitting at the bench just outside, and I overheard Layla talking to Cora. She was using this soft, therapeutic voice. "Cora, you don't have to prove anything to these men. You don't have to perform masculinity by doing all this heavy lifting. Your value isn't tied to your ability to emulate male strength." Cora was eating a sandwich. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and then looked Layla dead in the eye. "I'm not performing masculinity, Layla. I'm doing my job. The plaster is heavy. The molds are heavy. What do you want me to do? Ask one of the guys to carry my work for me?" Layla smiled patiently. "That's not a sign of weakness. It's about acknowledging systemic disadvantages and allowing the privileged group to help correct the imbalance." Cora actually laughed. A short, sharp bark. "Right. So I should do half the work of the men, but expect the same pay and the same respect? That's not how it works here. Evan pays us for what we produce, the quality of our work. That's it. It's the most honest job I've ever had." Layla shook her head, like she was dealing with a lost cause. "It's sad that you've internalized the toxic productivity metrics of a male-dominated field. You have so much potential to be a leader for change here." Cora just finished her sandwich, crumpled up the wrapper, and stood up. "I am a leader," she said. "My name is on the best pieces that leave this workshop. Let me know when your name is on anything other than a time card." She walked back inside, leaving Layla sitting there with a look of profound pity on her face, as if Cora was too brainwashed to be saved. This became her pattern. She didn't see a functioning, merit-based workplace. She saw a system of oppression that only she was smart enough to recognize. She saw me, a guy who was just trying to do his job, as a gatekeeper of toxic masculinity. She would stand over my shoulder while I was doing fine detail work, something that requires intense focus. "Your technique is very aggressive," she'd say. "It's a very forceful approach to the material. Have you ever tried a more nurturing, collaborative method with the plaster?" I'm literally carving a leaf pattern with a tiny metal tool. I don't know how to do it nurturingly. "I'm just following the design, Layla." "But the design itself is a product of patriarchal aesthetics," she'd reply, completely serious. "All sharp angles and rigid lines. It leaves no room for feminine fluidity." It was exhausting. It was like having a live-in art critic who hated art. She barely did any real work. Her main contribution was a constant stream of commentary. She would reorganize tool benches, putting things in places that made no sense, claiming it was for better ergonomic flow. It just meant none of us could find our favorite tools. Evan was patient to a point. He'd correct her, redirect her, and try to give her tasks that were impossible to mess up. But she saw every correction not as guidance, but as a personal attack, an attempt to silence her. If he told her the plaster mix was too thin, she'd say he was invalidating her intuitive process. If he told her she needed to sand a piece more carefully, she'd accuse him of micromanaging the female creative spirit. Every conversation with her was a minefield of academic buzzwords. The rest of us just developed a system of ignoring her as much as possible. We'd put headphones in or get really focused on our work whenever she came near. The tension in the workshop, which used to be so relaxed, was becoming thick and heavy, like wet plaster. The breaking point started when we got a huge commission, a big, important job. It was a restoration project for a historic theater downtown. They were redoing their entire lobby, and they needed us to replicate and replace sections of ornate 100-year-old plasterwork. It was the biggest contract our workshop had ever landed, a huge deal for Evan's reputation. The centerpiece was this massive, incredibly detailed archway. It was covered in intricate scrollwork, cherubs, all sorts of delicate features. The original was damaged, and we had to create a new master mold and cast dozens of replacement sections. It was all hands on deck. The most difficult, high-stakes work we'd ever done. This was work that required years of experience. The margin for error was zero. Layla saw the plans for the archway spread out on the Evans desk. Her eyes lit up. This was it. This was the real art she had been waiting for. She walked straight into Evan's office. The door was open. We could all hear it. "Evan," she said, her voice full of authority, "I need to be the lead on the archway project." There was a pause. I can just imagine Evan's face, that slow blink of his. "You need to be the lead?" he asked. "Yes. This piece requires a specific sensibility, a historical empathy. It's a delicate, ornate design, something that requires a feminine touch, not the brute force methods I've seen used here. I have studied this period extensively. I am uniquely qualified to oversee this." Evan's voice was calm but firm. "Layla, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is the most complex project we've ever taken on. I'm leading it myself, with Cora and Anon assisting on the master mold. It requires years of practical experience." "So, you're giving it to 2 men and a woman who has assimilated into the male power structure," Layla stated, not asked. "I'm giving it to my 3 most experienced craftspeople," Evan corrected her. "Your job on this project will be to prep the plaster, We're going to need hundreds of buckets mixed to a perfect consistency. That is a critical role. If the mix is bad, the piece is ruined." We could hear the anger in her voice. It was shaking. "I see. So, my academic knowledge and artistic vision mean nothing. You're putting me on mixing duty. You're putting the woman with the most progressive understanding of the material on manual labor. This is unbelievable." Evans sighed. We could hear the weariness in his voice. It was a sound we were all becoming familiar with. "Your job is what I assign you, Layla. This is not a democracy. It's my workshop, and it's my reputation on the line. You will mix the plaster, or you will find another internship." The office was silent for a long moment. Then Layla walked out. She didn't look angry anymore. Her face was cold and calm. It was a look of absolute certainty, the kind of look someone gets when they believe they are a righteous crusader fighting a great injustice. She looked at me, then at Cora, with pure contempt. In her eyes, we weren't just colleagues. We were part of the problem. We were the oppressors. She walked over to the mixing station without a word. I remember turning to Cora and saying, "This is not going to end well." Cora just shook her head, her eyes on Layla. "No," she said, "it's not." And as Layla stood there, staring at the bags of plaster and the empty buckets, I saw a look on her face that wasn't about art or feminism or any of the other things she talked about. It was the look of someone who had just decided that if they couldn't get what they wanted, they were going to make sure no one else could either. I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. She wasn't just planning to do a bad job. She was planning to prove she was right, and she was going to burn the whole place down to do it. The work on the archway began. It was a slow, painstaking process. Evan, Cora, and I were in the main room, working on the master mold. It was like surgery. We had to perfectly capture every tiny detail from the surviving fragments of the original. Meanwhile, Layla was at the mixing station, but she wasn't the same person anymore. The constant stream of complaints and critiques stopped. She became quiet, methodical, almost unnervingly focused. She had her phone propped up, not scrolling social media, but reading what looked like chemical data sheets and articles about material science. She bought a little notebook and started writing things down. Formulations, ratios, observations. She treated her corner of the workshop like a laboratory. She'd measure out the plaster powder and water with scientific precision, using a digital scale she brought from home. She'd take the temperature of the water. She'd time her mixes with a stopwatch. On the surface, it looked like she had finally taken the job seriously, but it didn't feel right. There was a coldness to it, a kind of intellectual arrogance. She wasn't trying to be a good team member. She was trying to be smarter than the process. She was trying to perfect a system that had already been perfected through decades of trial and error. She would bring us a bucket of plaster, perfectly mixed according to the formula on the wall, and present it with this look on her face. A silent, smug, "See? I am capable of manual labor. I have mastered your primitive ways." We were all on edge around her. Her silence was louder than her constant talking had ever been. It felt like she was gathering data, studying us, waiting for the right moment. I was the one who had to take the buckets from her. Every time I'd walk over, she'd be wiping down her pristine work area or making a note in her little book. She never made eye contact. She would just nod towards the bucket, a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and full of self-importance. I started checking every single bucket she mixed. I'd check the consistency, the texture, everything. It was always perfect, too perfect. It was like she was lulling us into a false sense of security. The work on the master mold took over a week. It was finally ready. A beautiful, massive piece of silicone and fiberglass, containing the negative space of every delicate curve and cherub's face. Now came the most critical part, the first pour. This pour would create the master positive, the perfect plaster replica from which we would make the production molds. If this one failed, we'd have to start the entire molding process over. It would mean days of lost work and thousands of dollars in wasted materials. The pressure was immense. Evan called a brief meeting that morning. "Okay, everyone, this is it. One shot," he said. "The mix has to be absolutely perfect. Not too thick, not too thin, no air bubbles. Layla, are you clear on the formula?" She looked up from her notebook, a small, confident smile on her face. "Crystal clear, Evan. You can rely on me to provide a mixture of optimal viscosity and tensile strength." Evan just stared at her. "Just follow the recipe on the wall, Layla. That's all I need." We prepped the mold, leveling it perfectly on the pouring table. It was so large it took up the entire space. Cora and I were on one side, Evan on the other. Our job was to pour simultaneously and evenly, to ensure the plaster filled every nook and cranny without trapping air. Layla was at the mixing station, a good 20 feet away. She had 3 large buckets lined up, ready to go. Evan gave the signal. "First bucket, Layla." She brought it over. I took it from her. It felt right. The consistency looked perfect. I gave Evan a nod. We started to pour. The plaster flowed like silk into the mold. It was a good start. "Second bucket." Layla scurried back and returned with the next one. Again, it looked perfect. We poured it in. The mold was about halfway full. Everything was going smoothly. I started to relax. Maybe I had been paranoid. Maybe she had finally understood the importance of teamwork. "Third bucket, Layla. Let's get it done," Evan called out. She went back to the station. This is the moment that I'll always replay in my head. Evan was focused on the far side of the mold, tapping the edge to release any potential air bubbles. Cora was grabbing more clamps to secure a section that was looking slightly stressed from the weight. I was watching the flow of the plaster, making sure it was even. For about 15 seconds, no one was looking directly at Layla. She must have been waiting for that. I glanced over just as she was turning back with the third bucket, and I saw it, just a flicker of movement. On her mixing bench, there were 2 bags of additives we sometimes used for special applications. One was a standard, slow-cure hardener in a white bag. The other was a rapid-set, high-strength chemical accelerant in a blue bag. The blue bag stuff was dangerous. You only used it for small, quick patch jobs. It would cause a large batch of plaster to heat up and cure almost instantly, making it brittle and prone to cracking. It was explicitly forbidden for fine detail casting. There was a huge warning label on the bag. I saw her kick the blue bag slightly under the bench with her foot. My blood ran cold. But she was already walking towards us, the bucket in her hands. The plaster inside looked identical to the first 2. There was no proof. It was just a glance, a suspicion. If I stopped the pour, now based on a hunch, I'd look like an idiot. I'd be the one who ruined the most important job in the workshop's history. She would probably claim I was trying to sabotage her. So I said nothing. I took the bucket. It felt the same. Evan gave the nod. "Pour it." I started pouring. For the first few seconds, everything was fine. The plaster flowed in, leveling out with the rest. And then it happened. A wisp of steam rose from the surface of the plaster. Then another. I could feel the heat through my gloves, radiating from the bucket. "Stop pouring," Evan shouted. But it was too late. The plaster in the mold began to change. It went from a liquid to a semi-solid in about 5 seconds. We heard a sickening cracking sound as the rapid curing process created immense internal stress. The surface, which should have been glass smooth, was now a lumpy, fractured mess. A huge fissure ran right through the middle of the archway's most detailed section. It was ruined. Completely, utterly, unsalvageably ruined. The entire workshop fell silent. The only sound was the faint hiss of the still curing plaster. We all just stared at the disaster. A week of our lives, thousands of dollars in materials, the reputation of the workshop, all of it destroyed in less than a minute. Evan walked slowly around the table. He reached out and touched the surface of the ruined cast. He pulled his hand back instantly. It was scorching hot. He closed his eyes. I had never seen him look so defeated. He opened them again and looked straight at the mixing station. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Layla, what did you do?" And then the performance began. Tears instantly welled up in Layla's eyes. Her face crumpled. I don't know," she wailed. "I followed the formula. I did everything exactly right." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "It was him. It was Anon." I was so shocked I couldn't even speak. I just stared at her. "He was watching me all morning, like a hawk," she sobbed. "He kept coming over to my station. He must have dumped something in the bucket when I turned my back. I saw him." Evan turned his gaze to me. It wasn't accusatory, just searching. Cora looked from me to Layla, her face a mask of stone. Layla was just getting started. She took a step forward, the tears streaming down her face. "He couldn't stand it," she cried, her voice rising with theatrical indignation. "He couldn't stand that I was given such a critical role. His fragile male ego couldn't handle a woman being essential to the project. He told me yesterday this project needed a man's touch. He had to prove I would fail. It's classic toxic masculinity. He sabotaged me. He sabotaged all of us to make me look bad." It was a masterclass. Every word was perfectly chosen to paint me as the villain and her as the innocent victim of a misogynistic plot. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The other guys in the workshop were just staring, not knowing what to believe. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but what could I say? I thought I saw her kick a bag. It sounded pathetic. I felt completely powerless. It was my word against her tears. And in this day and age, I knew exactly whose side people would take. I could see my job, my reputation, everything, just circling the drain. And then, a calm, clear voice cut through the drama. "She's lying." It was Cora. She walked from her side of the table and stood right in the middle of the room. All eyes were on her. Layla's crying hitched for a second. "Cora, no. You know what he's like." Cora ignored her completely. She looked straight at Evan. "I saw her," Cora said, her voice steady and even. "I saw her this morning with her notebook and her phone. She wasn't just following the formula. She thought she could improve it." She pointed towards the mixing station. "Go look by the blue bag of accelerant, the one we never use for casting. I'll bet you find a fresh dusting of powder on the floor that she missed when she tried to kick it out of sight." Layla's face went white. The tears stopped instantly. That's ridiculous," she stammered. "I never touched that." Cora didn't even look at her. She kept her eyes on Evan. "A few days ago," Cora continued, her voice ringing with authority, "I saw her reading about polymer-modified gypsum. I told her to stick to the materials we know. She told me I had internalized patriarchal limitations and that I was afraid of feminine innovation." She paused, letting the words sink in. "She didn't make a mistake," Cora said, finally turning to look directly at Layla with undisguised contempt. "She did this on purpose. She thought she was smarter than you, Evan, smarter than all of us. She wanted the poor to fail so she could blame it on our outdated methods and then show us how her improved formula would have worked. But she's not a craftswoman. She's just a student with a textbook. She got the chemistry wrong, and she destroyed the project to feed her own ego." Every word was like a hammer blow. The truth of it was undeniable. It explained everything. Her weird behavior, the notebook, the smug silence. Layla stood there, exposed. Her mask was gone. There was no victim. There was just a spiteful, arrogant saboteur. She looked around, desperate, but no one would meet her eyes. She had lost the room completely. Evan walked slowly over to the mixing station. He bent down. He ran his finger along the floor next to the blue bag. He looked at the white powder on his fingertip. He didn't need to say a word. He walked back and stood in front of Layla. He looked at her not with anger, but with a kind of profound disappointment. "I gave you an opportunity to learn a skill, Layla," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "This craft, this workshop, it's my life. We don't care about gender or politics here. We care about the work. We care about each other. We are a team. And you were never part of it. You just wanted to use us as a prop in your own little ideological play." He pointed to the door. "Get your things. You are not welcome here anymore." Layla just stared at him, her mouth opening and closing. The tears were gone, replaced by a hot, ugly rage. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I'll sue you. I'll sue this entire toxic, misogynistic company for wrongful termination and for creating a hostile work environment. You'll be finished." Evan didn't flinch. He walked over to his desk and picked up a calculator and a notepad. He started punching in numbers. The cost of the plaster, the silicone, the fiberglass, the man-hours for the mold creation, the lost time. He wrote down a final number on the pad, tore off the sheet, and walked back to her. He held it out. "Here," he said calmly. "This is a bill for the materials you willfully destroyed and the labor costs you wasted. We can start with this when your lawyer calls mine." Layla looked at the piece of paper. I was standing close enough to see the number. It was well over 5 figures. The color drained from her face. The reality of what she had done finally hit her. This wasn't a classroom debate anymore. This was real life, with real consequences. She looked at the bill, then at Evan's unyielding face, then at Cora's stony glare, and then at me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She crumpled the paper in her fist, grabbed her fashionable bag, and stormed out of the workshop, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. The poison was gone. We all stood there for a minute, just breathing. The smell of hot, ruined plaster still filled the air. Evan looked at the destroyed archway, then at us. He looked exhausted. He sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "Well," he said, forcing a weary smile, "nobody's going home early today." He picked up a crowbar. Cora grabbed a hammer. I took a heavy-duty scraper. Without another word, we all turned to the ruined masterpiece and began the long, hard work of breaking it apart so we could start all over again. And as I worked, shoulder to shoulder with Evan and Cora, I thought about what had happened. Layla had come in demanding to be treated as a special, unique woman. In the end, we did treat her exactly like we would have treated anyone else who betrayed our trust and tried to destroy our work. We treated her like she was irrelevant, and we got back to work.